When I was young, the phrase I heard most was, "I feel sorry for you." Everywhere I went, in kindergarten, in restaurants, at family gatherings, people always repeated these three heavy words. Even from such a young age with limited understanding, such expressions of pity made me feel frustrated because it wasn't their sympathy I needed. It was their empathy. Empathy can be defined as the ability to understand and share others' feelings. When we empathize, we absorb other people's data, we process it to understand their hurt, and we acknowledge that at times we have felt similarly. Empathy is a unifying force that is rooted in our shared humanity. Conversely, sympathy evokes feelings of pity and sorrow for someone else's misfortune. By definition, we regard that which receives our sympathy as separate from us. Each of these sentiments can be useful, but with very specific applications and implications. I learned about these distinctions when I consulted research by Dr. Douglas Chismar, which suggests that while sympathy accepts and understands that a problem exists, empathy responds to another's perceived emotional state by allowing us to experience similar feelings as the subject of our empathy. Empathy allows those who give and receive to feel connected, perhaps even relieved, that someone shares their experience and understands its challenges. It does not presume misfortune or sorrow. Rather, it conveys to the listener, "I see you, I feel what you feel." Empathy can be much more complex than conveying sympathy because it requires that we recall our own potentially painful experiences. It necessitates a sophisticated consideration of the emotions of others and results in an evaluation of how a person's response would mirror our own. It involves risk-taking, but once this simple risk is offered, the reward allows for a deeper connection between individuals than that which can be achieved through pity. If we were to investigate different circumstances that appropriately spark sympathy in lieu of empathy, what might we conclude is that such situations tend to be relatively short-term, that is, we know they will eventually pass. As such, it can be gratifying to feel sympathy, to give it and receive it for a time, whereas sympathy forever can be wearying. Growing up, I never doubted that my brother was different from his peers. At 10 years old, he couldn't speak in full sentences. I remember fearing that he would cry everywhere we went or feel anxious that he would whisper strange combinations of gibberish mixed with Korean. Even though he's only 1 year younger than me by birth, at age 6, his mental capacity was still that of a toddler. As my brother became older, it became clear that despite how tall his body would grow, his brain would not catch up. With every year that passed, I would ask my parents when he was going to speak and act normally, like my friend's younger siblings. I asked my parents when I would finally be able to have a younger brother that I could argue with and play with, just as my friends did with their younger brothers. Not knowing how to respond, they did what many parents who love their daughters would do. They lied. They also lied to themselves, and from what I observed, they were in serious denial. Years passed with repetitive questions and false answers. Eventually, I stopped believing them, and in time, we stopped talking about it altogether. I became aware of a need to find answers for myself. I have learned to make peace with their response, understanding that they were afraid, and fear is a powerful motivator. I think they must have thought that if they accepted the truth that my brother's condition wouldn't change, their lost hope would spiral into despair and despondency. Once we lose hope and courage, facing harsh realities can seem impossible to manage. The truth is, he will not recover, and we will need to continually support and accommodate his needs. The American Psychiatric Association defines Fragile X syndrome as a general mental ability disorder that affects intellectual and adaptive functioning. It impacts 1 to 3% of the global population, with those affected by this disability demonstrating an IQ that ranges between 30 and 40. There are permanent symptoms caused by an irreversible mutation of the X chromosome. This moderate to severe intellectual disability, which is characterized by limited cognition, verbal and nonverbal communication, makes my brother unable to engage independently in even the most simple daily routines, such as going outside or simple self-maintenance, like taking a shower or clipping his nails. In fact, he requires supervision, especially in social settings, most of the time. Learning about the Fragile X syndrome, its causes and effects, has helped me accept my brother's reality. He will remain nonverbal. He will not be able to behave like people his age. And he will need professional and familial support for the rest of his life. These truths are difficult enough to face without constant reminders of pity reflected back in other people's eyes. These well-meaning but unceasing expressions of sympathy toward our permanent situation had negative effects. Dr. Fominaya suggests that expressions of sympathy can make one feel as though they're stuck within a framework of misfortune. It can inspire feelings of shame and discouragement that are caused by perceiving circumstances that they themselves have adjusted to, as unfortunate as others who have not been exposed claim them to be. Another study conducted by Jennifer Crocker of the Department of Psychology of Ohio State further develops the consequences for sympathy and pity. She corroborates that people often think that sympathy is a positive way to show concern. However, her findings note that sympathy can conjure a wide range of unintended negative consequences for self-esteem, affect, and motivation. This resonates with me now since I've always felt that the sympathy my family received made me feel discouraged and disconnected. Although most people were merely expressing what they thought were positive expressions of concern, their expressions shattered my confidence and hindered my family's resilience. They evoked anxiety that we were as unfortunate as others perceived. So I started to hide my brother's condition from people who didn't know about it. Feeling ashamed, I started to consciously and unconsciously avoid those who did know about it. I became particularly sensitive and conservative when talking about my sibling. I was afraid to openly speak about my brother since I was reluctant to accept more pity. Sympathy was meant to comfort us, yet it repeatedly failed to achieve its intended effect. Fominaya's study shows associations between sympathy and other effects of stigma, including segregation and public avoidance. It notes that living with perceived stigma in society reinforces the perception that some people, like those living with disabilities, are less fortunate than others. This can become really debilitating to those of us who are trying to make peace with our circumstances or feel empowered to overcome them. Sympathy can intensify social rejection of people with disabilities. It can lead to prejudice and discrimination. Constant sympathy is like a badge one wears that serves to remind people of this one aspect of their life. It discounts all else. This misunderstanding can impact overall social perception toward the subject. For people who have disabilities or who love people with disabilities, these reminders can intensify misconceptions that we are living a difficult and pitiful life. Empathy, on the other hand, is a totally different experience. I vividly recall the first time I noted the distinction from a teacher whose son has a paraplegic disability, meaning that he couldn't move his lower body below the waist. Talking with the teacher, she was able to listen to and empathize with my experiences. She understood the challenges of living with a family member who has a disability and could relate with the emotions I was experiencing. She helped me empathize with my parents, allowing me to understand their perspective. and help us overcome separation and isolation caused by my brother's condition. Connecting with his teacher created a clear contrast with what then seemed like shallow sympathies. It felt more inclusive, open-minded, and much more comfortable. When we communicate that we can relate with another's situation and truly mean it, they can become better equipped to openly share about and process associated experiences, which is what I did with my teacher. It's commonly misunderstood that one must undergo the same hardship in order to express empathy. In reality, we are all human. We all understand what it feels like to struggle, suffer, and overcome. Accessing these ties that connect us with people around us, regardless of age, race, and gender. I'm by no means advocating that we eliminate sympathy from our repertoire of responses to others' misfortune. Some situations call for this as a natural response, for example, when a person sprains their ankle or their wallet is stolen. But use sympathy with discretion. Assess the situation's permanence, and if it seems like the person will likely recover, your sympathy may be welcome. We need to weigh the reason and value of our responses to others' hardship if we are to determine an appropriate response. This can be difficult because it means that we need to tune into the depth and circumstances surrounding others' suffering. In my case, unceasing expressions of sympathy was used in relation to disability, which I don't believe is something to feel sorry about. When we are among ourselves, my family is peaceful and happy. In contrast, when we encounter others who overly express sympathy, our attention is drawn to the misfortune and discomfort others feel about our circumstances. Their expression is not actually about us, it's really about them. Life necessitates that we adapt and grow cohesive in the face of adversity. My family chooses not to think of my brother's needs as unfortunate. Even if his intellectual disability precludes him from normalcy in the eyes of society, his condition, for those who love him, has become our normal. We actively choose to love and accept him just as he is, and we plan to live together, grow together, and support each other as a strong, loving family for the foreseeable future. I strongly urge you to reconsider sympathy and to strive for empathy. To do that, you'll need to become aware of what may be socially conditioned responses that show sympathy or pity. Be mindful of your facial expressions, such as eyebrows pulled down flat forward over the bridge of the nose, furrowing at the center of the brow. These facial cues are the nonverbal equivalent to spoken phrases like "I feel sorry for you" and "it must be so difficult." Strive to consciously remember the resilience people need to learn to develop in the face of personal challenge. Just because we are newly regarding their circumstances and find them to be tragic doesn't mean that they do. In fact, we can't wallow in the tragedy of unchanging circumstances indefinitely if we are to make any progress toward adapting or healing. When expressing sympathy, remember that even if your intention is positive, even if in your mind you're trying to show compassion, the results can be negative. As we evaluate whether a situation warrants a sympathetic or empathetic response, remember the duration of the situation and the depth of your connection will determine the understanding that it requires. As a general rule, empathy is a far more wide-reaching response. If a person is in need of empathy, focus your energy on what you imagine the person must feel. Try to recall a time you have felt similarly in the past. Draw on your shared humanity to conjure feelings that will guide your response. Once you've accessed these feelings, don't linger too long. Remember, you should not be the focus. They should. So ask about what they're going through and truly stick around to listen. Situations that call for verbal expressions of sympathy or empathy should not focus on how you feel for the person, but instead be attentive to what the other person may be feeling. Too much self-involvement and self-importance can fail to understand the feelings of others. So try to catch yourself before showing too much sympathy to make yourself feel comfortable about a situation. Don't inflate your importance and think that it's your job to make them feel better. What you can do, instead, is acknowledge the courage it takes to share their experience. You can appreciate that they choose you to confide in. You can clarify and show that you're actively listening by asking questions that focus on them as the subject, and that will help you better understand the nuances of their situation. You can observe the strengths in their characters that will help them recognize their own power. Any of these responses would more accurately convey that you care. Any of these responses would offer reassurance that you are there for them and that you want to help. Any of these actions would do so more powerfully than if you were to say the words. So check in and show up when you say you will. Following up shows that you actually care and allows them to continue to share with you. Dr. Judith Orloff of the American Psychiatric Association and a New York Times best-selling author reminds us that empathy is the medicine the world needs. It is through empathy and through sharing experiences that we become a more connected, understanding, and inclusive community that together can overcome anything. Thank you.